Hello and welcome to this lesson which is on anaerobic respiration. The objectives are to explain what anaerobic respiration is and link the processes in different organisms to the correct equations, and explain what oxygen debt is and how it can be paid off. Your quick test to start off with is to think about how breathing rate and heart rate change during exercise and why. So pause the video, write down the title, date and objectives and complete the quick task. Okay, and the breathing rate and heart rate during exercise change by increasing. So we need to get oxygen to our muscles more quickly, and we need to get glucose to our muscles more quickly. So the heart pumps the blood faster around the body in order to deliver those things that more quickly. And also our breathing rate increases, take in more oxygen and also get rid of more carbon dioxide because respiration is happening more quickly. So here's a picture of someone and I want you to think about what is happening and why. If you're watching this video with someone, talk to them about what you think the picture is showing. Otherwise, you can just think about it to yourself or jot down a couple of bullet points. Okay, so what's happening in this picture is someone's been doing some exercise and they've been pushing themselves maybe a bit too hard and they've got a stitch. So the reason they get a stitch is because they got anaerobic respiration occurring and a buildup of lactic acid. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Now let's think about who's more likely to get a stitch and why. So think about person A, who is very active and they often cycle and jog, or person B who is not very active and does not exercise often. If they're both doing the same intensity of exercise for the same amount of time, which one do you think would be more likely to get a stitch first? So the answer is that person A will probably not get a stitch before person B. Person B might not have as healthy a heart because they're not exercising as often. They also might not have as strong lungs. So if you exercise lots, then your heart and lungs get stronger. And as the muscle cells in your body move and respire, they will need oxygen and they will need glucose. They'll also be producing carbon dioxide, which needs to go back to the lungs to be breathed out. So here we go. Oxygen is being delivered by the blood that's being pumped from the heart to the cells. But after a while, if the heart and lungs can't keep up with providing the cells with oxygen, lactic acid starts to build up because the cells start to respire anaerobically. So instead of being able to, the blue arrows representing deoxygenated blood being pumped by the heart to the lungs so that the carbon dioxide can diffuse into the lungs and be breathed out. But if the heart and lungs are not as efficient and or effective as someone who exercises frequently, then the cells will not be able to respire aerobically because they won't be getting enough oxygen and lactic acid builds up. So before we start talking about lactic acid, I just want to make sure that you remember what the photosynthesis and the respiration equation are. Pause the video here and see if you can write down the word equations for respiration and photosynthesis from memory. And here are your answers. So in respiration, we start off with glucose and oxygen. A reaction happens and energy is released, and your products, the things that you're left with, are carbon dioxide and water. However, in photosynthesis, you start off with carbon dioxide and water. They're your reactants. And a chemical reaction happens where sunlight is taken in by the plant, the energy of the sun is taken in and used to form glucose and oxygen. So what we can see here is that respiration and photosynthesis are like the same things but backwards. So the products and reactants are swapped around. And we can see that in respiration, the process is exothermic. Energy is given out. Whereas in photosynthesis, energy is taken in from the sun. So the process is endothermic. So that's just a useful thing to remember, is that respiration and photosynthesis are basically the same thing, but in one direction the reaction is exothermic, respiration, and in the other direction the process is endothermic, and that's photosynthesis. So on this slide, I've got three key equations that you need to know. So the first one here, aerobic respiration, you should know this by now. So glucose plus oxygen, the reaction happens and you get carbon dioxide plus water. Now, earlier I mentioned lactic acid. So what happens if our cells can't get enough oxygen? So in animals and in some microorganisms, when anaerobic respiration occurs, glucose is broken down without oxygen, so it's broken down incompletely and forms lactic acid. Now, if we get lactic acid in our muscles, that's what causes a stitch. And actually, if you get lactic acid being produced by microorganisms when they respire anaerobically, that can be useful to us because actually that's what we use to make yogurt. So the reason yogurt has a slight sour taste is that it has lactic acid in there. Okay, another equation that you need to know for anaerobic respiration is for plants and some other microorganisms, for instance, some types of bacteria and of course yeast. And these microorganisms and plants break glucose down incompletely if they don't have enough oxygen to make carbon dioxide and ethanol. And we use that. That's actually useful to us. So here, this picture here is bread that hasn't risen yet. So if you get bread dough and you mix in some yeast and some sugar, the yeast will start to respire anaerobically and release carbon dioxide. And those little bubbles you see in your slices of bread, they're actually little bubbles of carbon dioxide. And ethanol is also produced, but when you bake the bread, that's broken down by the heat in the oven and it just evaporates off. So that's a good thing because I don't want our bread to taste weird and alcoholic. Obviously, ethanol is, I've just mentioned, is what's used to make alcohol. So if you add yeast, for example, to grapes, you can eventually ferment that and produce wine. Okay, what I'd like you to do next is complete this gap fill exercise for your key notes for this lesson. So pause the video. It is quite a long one. Normally I don't make them as long as this, but take your time, fill in the gaps, and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, and here are your answers. Aerobic respiration uses oxygen to break down glucose and release energy. In anaerobic respiration, there's not enough oxygen, so glucose is broken down to lactic acid. Energy is transferred, but not as much as in aerobic respiration. The waste product of anaerobic respiration is lactic acid. This causes pain in the muscles. This is known as the oxygen debt. Breathing deeply after exercise allows extra oxygen to break down the lactic acid. When some microorganisms, for example bacteria and yeast, and plants respire anaerobically, the waste products are carbon dioxide and ethanol. Okay, so here's your task. I want you to use page 148 or 149 in the Activate 2 book, which is available on Caboodle, so you need to log into Caboodle. And then write an explanation aimed at 11-year-old netball players to explain why they have achy muscles and are puffing and panting at the end of their match. So pause the video, log on to Caboodle, open the book at that page, and then write your explanation that is aimed at younger pupils as to why they are achy and also puffing and panting after exercise. Pause the video here. Okay, here's the answer. So I'm hoping that in your answer you've mentioned something about lactic acid buildup causing achy muscles and causing an oxygen debt. So in order to repay that oxygen debt, the netball players have to breathe deeply, and that's why they seem to be puffing and panting after the exercise, to repay that oxygen debt and break down the lactic acid that's gathered, that's in their muscles, and it's making them ache. Okay, and here's a test style question for you. Question 1A. Respiration is a process which takes place in living cells. What is the purpose of respiration? Write your answer down. Question B, part 1, you have to balance the equation for the process of respiration when oxygen is available. And this was shown to you in a previous lesson, so you should hopefully have remembered that. Question B2, what is the name of the substance in the equation with the formula C6H12O6? If you need to pause the video, do so now and write your answers to these questions. Next question is, what is the name of the process of respiration when oxygen is not available? Write your answer down. And the next one, describe the process of respiration which takes place in human beings when oxygen is not available, and give an effect. Now that's worth 3 marks, so you're going to have to write a bit more for that one. So pause the video here and we'll go through the answers afterwards. Okay, so here's your answers to your questions. Question 1A, the purpose of respiration is to transfer or provide or to give or release energy. I would say the most important definition for respiration is to release energy. Question 1, part B. Last lesson I explained to you the balanced symbol equation. It's C6H12O6, 6 molecules of oxygen, and then the reaction occurs. And then you end up with 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of H2O or water. Now I do want you to try and memorize that. I know it's quite tricky, but it'd be really good if you all knew the balanced symbol equation for respiration. It's a really useful thing to have memorized. And question B, part 2, what is C6H12O6? It is glucose. Question D, part 1, when respiration occurs without enough oxygen, we call it anaerobic respiration. And for part 2, you could have given any 3 answers from these. So if you mentioned anything about respiration occurring inside the mitochondria, or if you'd mentioned anything about glucose being broken down or reacting, or to give lactic acid, that would be worth 2 marks if you'd just written that in one sentence. If you'd mentioned that lactic acid causes pain, it would have got you a mark. If you'd mentioned that there would be an oxygen debt, that would be worth 1 mark. Now, the advantage of anaerobic respiration of aerobic is that it is a quick source of energy, but it's less efficient than aerobic because the glucose isn't completely broken down. So if you had written any of these points, 3 of any of these things that I've underlined, that would have given you the 3 marks there. So to finish off with, I want you to write down what score you got out of 7 and consider if you've met the learning objectives for today. Can you explain what anaerobic respiration is and link the process in different organisms to the correct equations? And can you explain what oxygen debt is and how it can be paid off? Consider how confident you are, whether it's totally confident with a smiley face, fairly confident with a middle face, or completely underconfident with a sad face. And then what I want you to do is complete some extra study on the areas that you're not confident with. So you might want to try something like BBC Bite Size, Caboodle Activities, or the digital book, or any other resources that you're used to using that you find helpful particularly for you. If you've got any questions or worries, don't forget you can always email your normal science teacher and they will be able to help you out. Thank you very much for your hard work today. Bye.